Hello and welcome back to Web Design for Small Business. In this video, part 14, PHP Encryption, we're going to be continuing where we left off with the last video and talking about how to create encryption algorithms to protect the data we're transmitting over the web. Okay, and one last thing we're going to do in here, underneath this, we're going to, actually I'm going to tab this all out. Okay, so here I'm going to pass messages. And I'm going to create e-message and c-message. So basically an error message and a confirmation message. So bad and good, right? One will show up as red, one will show up as green. So basically what we'll do is whenever we get an error message, we're going to tell it to save it to a cookie that is our error cookie, say with confirmation messages. So whenever we need to pass messages between pages, we need to be able to communicate to the site that it needs to store that information and then retrieve it. So this is the retrieving section of that. And they're basically going to be rather similar. So we are going to filter, equals to filter input and input cookie. Name is going to be EMSG. Actually, I'm going to make that a capital M. And we're going to do a filter callback. So I haven't done a filter callback yet. We've done the sanitized string, filter sanitized string, but this doesn't do a whole lot for us, and there's a few more things that we can do. So instead of passing it to one specific pre-made filter, we're going to set it to go through our custom filter. And that's what the filter callback does, is it allows you to pass it through, instead of one of the predefined filters, a custom filter that we will create in a couple minutes. Okay, so filter callback, the square brackets, which is a shortcut for creating an array. So basically the filter callback, and then it'll say what do you want to call back, and it gives you an array, and in the array it's going to be options is the key, and the value is, if you remember when we did the associated arrays, you have the key and value pair separated by the equal sign and greater sign. That makes it kind of look like an arrow. And then in here, it's the name of a custom function. And you can actually have multiple functions listed, but we're just going to use one. And we're going to call that data secure. And then we're going to clear the cookie. So because we're pulling this off of a cookie, which means that there's already a cookie in place. But because we pulled it off once, we now want to clear that cookie so that when we load the page again, we're not getting the same error message because it still exists, right? So we need to basically delete the cookie once we pulled it. And in order to do that, we create another cookie. So set cookie, and the cookie name is going to be eMessage, and it's going to have a value of blank, so just 2 single quotes with nothing in between. We're going to give it a time, so this is the expiration time, so we're doing the current time, and then instead of adding an hour, we're actually going to remove an hour, so minus 3600. And then the rest is all the same. Okay, and ending with a semicolon. All right. So that is what it's going to look like. And I'm actually going to add another layer on top of this filter input to HTML special chars, or short for characters, decode, put a bracket around there, and a bracket around the end just before the semicolon. And then between these two right parentheses, a comma, and ENT all caps, underscore, no quotes. Okay, so that's what we want it to look like in the end. And we're going to just copy that and paste it. And then we're just going to change the E to a C. In each of those cases. And that's it. So we're going to save this. And close that. Okay. And we're going to create a new file. And this one we're going to call encryption.php. And we're going to edit that. Now, if you want to be more secure and not use the same one that I'm creating and telling everybody on the internet to create, by all means change the names of them. Just remember what you're changing them to when you're adding them into that core file or requiring them. Okay, so for our encryption file, we're going to again give our PHP tags, and we're going to create a custom function. So function data secure, because we've called this. So this is the one from the file that we just created from the core file that we're going to be using for our filter inputs to filter all of our input data. So data secure, parentheses, in the parentheses, $data, and then curly bracers. On the new line, we go data is set to trim data. So the first thing we do is we take our data, so whatever information was passed through, and we trim it, which basically says remove white space from either end, and then give us that value. So now our data is the same as it used to be, minus any white space that was on the front or back. The next step is we're going to strip slashes. So this takes our new data file, or our new data variable, once the initial one has been trimmed, and it strips any slashes out of it. So that is fairly straightforward. Just basically removes the slashes. There, that goes there. Okay, and then this one basically removes any special characters and or converts them. And then finally we return what is left. So that is our basic function, and this is a relatively secure way to just strip any text data that's sent in from anything that could be malicious. This should cover most of those bases. So from now on, that's what we'll be doing, is we'll call this data secure function. Okay, so the next step is we're going to create some encryption algorithms. So we're going to start by typing in function and data encode 1. So a lowercase n there. So using camel caps, capital E, everything else is lowercase, the number 1 at the end, parentheses, and in the parentheses, data variable. So $data, space, and then curly bracers. And then we're going to type in if, parentheses, exclamation mark, $data, which means basically this exclamation point is used in PHP to delineate not. So where two things that are equal to each other is the double equals. If you have an exclamation point and an equals, it means it is not equal to. So if I didn't have this exclamation point, it would mean if this variable exists, so just having that by itself and not having is equal to anything, but just having that by itself means check if this exists. Having an exclamation point before it means check if this exists, and then if it doesn't, then do something. So if no data variable exists, then return, semicolon. So what this does is if somebody tries to use our function data encode 1 but doesn't put any actual data in it, then it just returns a blank space. So if you put blank space in it, it just returns blank space without actually trying to encrypt blank space. Because if you don't pass any information in here and it's just blank space, and then it encrypts that blank space, you are going to have characters, and it's going to fill your database with encrypted blank spaces, which isn't very secure, and it can be convoluted. If they don't have any information, we will want it to just remain a blank space. And that's what this line ensures us. Okay. So else, so if there is data, we need to do something with it. Sorry. And to save space, we're going to put the next line up here, and we're going to go global $K semicolon. So what this does is we want to use this K variable that was created outside of our function on another page somewhere, and we want to use that. However, our function doesn't know that anything exists outside of it. It is contained within these curly bracers. So the only data it knows about is either predefined PHP code, like superglobals, or any information we enter into it, like this data variable. So if it's not in here, it doesn't know how to use it. So what we do is we tell it, well, we want to use this variable called K, and it is a global variable. So basically meaning look for it outside of the function. Okay, so we do that, and then we go data is equal to MD5 parentheses semicolon. So MD5 is a one-way encryption algorithm built into PHP. But we're not going to just use that one. The next is crypt and parentheses, and then in that sh1 and parentheses. And then within those, $data. Now, but go one space over and go comma $K. So that's where our K comes into. So basically, the first thing we're doing is we're taking our data and we're encrypting it using this one-way SHA-1 encryption algorithm. Then we're going to encrypt what that gives us using the crypt one-way encryption algorithm. And crypt is slightly different because it doesn't just take our information and encrypt it. It takes our information and encrypts it using a salt or key, which we can define. And then we're taking that and we're further encrypting it using the MD5 encryption algorithm. So we're using 3 separate encryption algorithms combined together with one key to make it slightly variable. So how this works is that each one of these, so the MD5 and the SHA-1, you're saying, well, if there's nothing changing how it works, then how is it any different from server to server? It's actually defined on the server basically what that encryption uses. So it'll be the exact same on each server, but from server to server it will actually be different, if that makes any sense. So if I use this on my site, just MD5, and use it on your site, the encrypted information will be different, even if it's the same name or whatever that we're encrypting. And then we further complicate that by throwing in this key using crypt. So crypt is probably the best out of these because we can add our own salt or key. The other ones we don't get to choose that, but we're using a combination of all of them to make it that much more secure. Okay, so basically they would have to unencrypt it 3 times instead of just once. So we're taking that and then we are going to return data. So basically it says pull up the key from over here someplace. First it checks to see if we actually put anything in there to encrypt. If it did, then we pull our key out and we say encrypt it using this key and return the encrypted information. So that's what that does. Now, the problem with this is that this is what is called one-way encryption, which is why we have the number 1 there. And what that means is that while we can use this to encrypt data, there's no way of easily unencrypting it. So basically, once it's encrypted, it's gone forever, and we'll never be able to know what this is again unless we literally hack our own site and try to break that down. So this type of encryption is great for things like passwords, where we don't ever want to know what somebody's password is, because that's private to them and we don't want to know what it is. Now, there are other types of encryption where we do want to know what it is. For example, we will want to encrypt usernames, email addresses, phone numbers, that kind of contact information that could be used very maliciously. Sites that you may have heard of that get hacked and then their user data gets splashed all over the internet and there's all this contact information going around. That's the kind of things and scandal you want to avoid on your site. So what we do is we encrypt everything, so even if they get our database information, it's all encrypted and they have to further unencrypt it before it's even useful to get that information. So we need to be able to encrypt it, but then we still need to be able to actually view that data. We want to know what that person's name is. We want to be able to see their phone number and email address and send them messages. So we need to be able to unencrypt it just as easily as we encrypt it. So what we have to do is create a two-way data encryption. So the next one, function data encode 2. And we're going to share these same lines here. So if there is no data, then return, else grab our key, because we're going to use that again. And then we're going to take our data, and it's going to equal mt underscore rand, parentheses, and in there 0,9 dot. So what this does is it literally just creates a random number between 0 and 9 that we're going to add to the front of this. And why it's just one more step that throws off the hackers. Base 64 underscore encode brackets semicolon. So we're going to encode it using the base 64 encryption algorithm, which is a two-way encryption algorithm. So we can encode it and decode it using the same methods. However, to make it doubly secure, we're also going to use OpenSSL underscore encrypt. Okay, so for the first one, we're taking our data and we're going to specify that we are going to use AES, and now this is double quotes instead of my normal single quotes. I don't know if it needs to be double quotes or if you can use single quotes, but I have it down as the double, so that's what I'm sticking with, just in case it needs to be for some reason. Comma hash parentheses single quotes SHA256 comma MD5 SHA1. Okay. Now we're going 1, 2, 3, adding a comma, 0, comma, sub str or substring, parentheses, hash, parentheses, single quotes, SHA256, comma, crypt, parentheses, K, comma, 16. Sorry. K, comma, 7. One, 2, comma, 0, comma, 16. One, 2, 3. I have a feeling that I missed one after the crypt. So there should be 4 there. I'm just going to go over and double check that my parentheses are all closed off. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right, so then we return data. There we go. Alrighty. So that will encrypt our data using this very convoluted double encryption method with the cherry on top. Okay. So now what we need to do is have a way to decode that. So function data decode to data, and same thing as the other ones, we're going to use that. And data is equal to open SSL underscore decrypt. Get that Y in there. My keyboard has a bit of a sticky Y. Base 64 underscore decode bracket or parentheses and substring data comma 1 and 1 2 comma double quotes AES hyphen 256 hyphen CBC comma hash parentheses single quotes SHA 256 comma MD5 parentheses SHA 1 parentheses right. SHA-1 K 1 2 3 comma 0 comma sub str or substring parentheses hash parentheses single quotes SHA 256 comma crypt parentheses K comma 7 comma 0 comma 16 boom return data. All right, so now we have our input filter, we have our one-way encryption, and we have our two-way encryption and decryption. That is all we need for this one. Save that, close that. We need to go back into our core file, edit that, edit, And one thing we need to do is we need to make this key file appear before our encryption file, because we're going to need our key from here for the encryption. Save those changes, close that back out, create a new file, and call it key.php. Create new file. And edit that one. PHP. Okay, so now in here we need to create our k variable, which should be anything you want within those single quotes. You can encrypt it if you want to make it even further, not something that people would generally know. You can do whatever you want with that. It really doesn't matter. I'm not going to show you what I'm going to do with mine. I'm going to edit it off screen, save it, and put it in. And you will just never know what it actually was. Okay, so later we will be adding more information to our key, namely we'll probably do a Google API if we get to that, and we'll be adding the API keys for our payment processors. But that we will store in there, and we will save that for later. Alright, so now we have this core PHP file, and all of our information is stored in there. And the next step we need to do is actually connect to our database. So now we can go back to our NetBeans and start working with those files we just created in our secure location. So the first thing we want to do is create another PHP file. In the source, new PHP file. We want to keep this in the root folder, sorry. And you can call this whatever you want. If you want it to be simple so you remember what it is, you can call it functions or engine, or if you didn't use core for the last one, you could call this one core. Honestly, you could call them both core. It doesn't really matter. If you want to call it banana, you can do that. Just remember what you call it. I think I am going to call it Highway 45.php. I'm going to be very original. Okay. So, now this file is going to contain the bulk of my PHP. So all the stuff that we're going to use for PHP from now on will basically be within this file, or we may link it to other files. But this is going to be the main file we work with from now on. So the first thing we're going to do is go back to our index.php, and we're going to go all the way up to the top. And under the doc type HTML and before the HTML, we are going to create a new line and question mark PHP require and the file that we're going to require is home/amazing. So home, so /home/ your username on your hosting service, which might actually be your domain name. That's typically how they do it by default. Then another slash, your web root directory, in our case it's highway 45, and then the file we just created, which is highway45.php, or whatever you called yours. So the file we just created here is what we're going to require at the top of our index.php page. So save that, and now go back to here, and at the top of here we're going to do another require, home/name, and we're going to type in the name of our secure directory, and then we're going to use our core.php file, and we're going to require that. And we're going to save this, and that's all we're going to have in it for right now. And we're going to go back to our just our web browser, and we're going to refresh our page just to make sure it loads properly and we don't get any errors, which we didn't, which is great. We didn't want any. Okay. So from here we can start accessing our database. So our login page before, where we pulled up our username and password, now what we can do is we can have it access our database, check to see if those exist. If it does, log us in. If it doesn't, log us out or return us with an error message saying that it failed. Now, because our database is empty and we don't have any values in there, it's going to reject it if we do that. So the next thing that we need to do is actually create a registration form where we fill out the information, submit it to the server, and generate that data before we can call it. But we are going to save that for the next video because this one has dragged on long enough. So in the next video, we will go over creating the registration form for our site, and then possibly after that we're going to go in and fix this login page so that we can log in, and we'll probably also create a log out page where it logs us out. So we will be able to create new user accounts, log in with those user accounts, and log out. So until then, stay safe and happy coding.